Does the bicycle industry need disruptive brands? And what is a disruptive business anyway, and who the hell are they disrupting? Disruptive innovation is an innovation that creates a new market for itself in an area that wasn't previously catered for, and eventually grows to outperform and edge out the existing companies that operate within that market space. And they can do this in a few different ways, and there's two main types of disruptive innovation within this kind of theory of kind of like business and economics. The term was first defined by Clayton M. Christensen in early 1995 in a paper he wrote with some colleagues. And how the title of disruptive innovation operates isn't how the name suggests. The name would suggest that a new technology disrupts the current business model, the current way of operating with a new high-tech solution that makes previous solutions redundant. The automobile making the horse and cart redundant, for example. But that's not really how the theory plays out when it's actually applied and businesses are broken down in case studies. So for example, a gearbox bike isn't a disruptive innovation. A gearbox bike that costs as much as an SLX equipped group set bike is. So let's go into those kind of what that actually means and unpack that a little bit. Well, let's look at the people who are producing those disruptive innovations first. Traditionally and conventionally, they are outsiders. They are new entrants to a business space. They're not the incumbent large organizations who whilst being market leaders and responding to their customers' needs, are not generally the source of a disruptive innovation. Smaller startups entering into that space are. They're entrepreneurs, they're the outsiders, there's people that have observed, carefully planned, and then entered in the space with a different approach to target markets that previously weren't being cared for by the incumbents. So if this was in bicycle terms, the incumbents would be large established companies, the specialized giants, Treks, those kind of large established brands with multiple ranges, multiple models in that ranges, predictable model cycles every year, those kind of businesses that have solid established supply chains and distribution networks. Those are the incumbents. The disruptive innovators come in, circumvent that model, and deliver something that answers a need that certain customers weren't having answered by those large incumbent companies. But not all disruptors do that in the same way. And there are two main types of disruptors. But before we look at what those two types of disruptors are, let's talk about why those established incumbents aren't the source of those disruptive innovations. To change the way that your business operates, to change your supply chain network, to change your distribution network as a large incumbent company is a very expensive, risk-heavy pivot. If, say, for example, Specialized goes all e-bikes, all we sell are e-bikes made of bamboo, direct sales. That might actually be the future, but that is a very, very risk-heavy strategy for Specialized to pivot in that manner. It alienates their existing customer base, and the research and development involved in that is too expensive. They have too much pre-invested in their current product cycle. They're too invested in their current supply chain and distribution networks. So instead of coming up with something totally different, they just make an evolved version of the stump jumper. Because if it doesn't taste like a stump jumper, it alienates their existing client base. Problem is, if people aren't looking for a stump jumper, they aren't being served by that company, and that provides the space for the disruptive brands to move in. So there's low-end disruptors and new market disruptors, which is actually a great name for a punk band. So the low-end disruptors do something slightly different. It's not at all what you would imagine just hearing the term what it is. So there's an element of the customer base that don't want or don't require the full performance that is currently available. No one's going to argue the Stump Jumper is a really good bike. It's a solid performer. But to get a one that's got a good solid spec and that's got everything you want is actually quite expensive. So low-level disruptors target that section of the market. You don't need the full performance, you only need a lower level performance that isn't currently being provided for at a lower price point. So people like Caliber, B-Twin, things like that. They are in-house brands of very large established buy and sell businesses. Buy product, import, sell through established distribution networks. And they're able to buy frames, in the case of Caliber, they buy catalogue frames and then use their buying power to get quantity at a cheap price for them. Average build kits, if we're being totally honest, but it caters for that market that didn't want to pay for the Stump Jumper and don't require the performance of the Stump Jumper. It's a good bike and they get it under that magic grand. So then they move in and that disrupts that current previous equilibrium, as it were. Customers who previously wouldn't have moved into the full suspension market now do and can. Now for that market and that business to grow, they need to increase their profitability, and the way to do that is to slowly eke up the performance available. Enter the beast nut. Better suspension, has a dropper, better brakes, proper tyres from the off. Costs a little bit more. And then they can slowly eke into the space that the Stump Jumper inhabits at that lower price point, and they've established themselves as a different option, and they can then inhabit that space. Now, I'm no way near suggesting that Caliber are going to edge out Specialized in the mountain bike market, but that is how that low-level disruptor moves into that market, and they're a really good example of that. We then have the kind of the punk new market disorders. So these are for customers who have performance needs, requirements, things they're looking for that aren't being catered for by the current market. So people I want a proper free ride rowdy bike that will live forever, that's titanium, that's exotic, that's rare. These people won't find a bike that fulfills those needs in the current lineup of Specialized, Santa Cruz, Giant. They don't have that bike. They don't have that titanium mental bike. So these new market disruptors can come in and provide something that the market isn't currently providing. And typically that is a small portion of the market, but once that is established, they can then move down the way, whereas the low-level disruptors move up. Once a brand has established itself, hey, you want that drop bar free ride bike? We have actually got something that's like a normal trail bike, but it's cool. And then they can move down into market and slowly equate the market share of the incumbent brands. So typically, these disruptive companies aren't actually using a new technology. They're using off-the-shelf components, whether that be small, medium-scale manufacture, offshoring, social media, web, direct communication with customers, and just it's the business model. It's the combination of those elements that's the disruptive element. So the thing that we need to be really clear here is it's not the technology that's disruptive in disruptive innovation, it's the business plan. It's how all those things are applied and the strategy. That's the thing that's different, and that's the thing that disrupts. If we look at the new market disruptors, they are people like Sick, Pole, Kingdom. Those brands are answering an area of the market that wasn't being catered for in a way that the large brands aren't able or aren't willing to do. So, those are the two forms of disruption, but who are they actually disrupting? Who's really being disrupted is the support networks of the current business models. So electric cars come in, and what they disrupt isn't Ford, it's not Toyota. They will simply pivot and start producing electric and hybrid vehicles. What electric cars disrupts is the support network. It's the service garages and the petrol stations. Those are the things that are disrupted. So then those businesses either have to pivot themselves and become something very different to support the new business model of electric vehicles, or they will become redundant. So in bicycles, that is the local bike shop and distribution-based businesses. They are currently being disrupted by the likes of direct sales. And local bike shops are having to pivot their business model as being the sole source of high-quality bicycle sales to meet that challenge. And a lot of them are working out to do that at the moment, some of them more successful than others. But another thing that a disruptive brand can do is it can change the narrative within that industry. Like if we go back to the automotive industry and look at that, the electric car was around at the same time and predates the petrol and the diesel car, but was outpaced for various reasons. If you want to kind of look up the Illuminati and Tesla, by all means go do so. So that's now essentially re-entering the market. It's entering into the space of the kind of the petrol car and diesel car. Car industry is very famous because of its incredibly complex and established supply chains and distribution support networks. Very slow to change, and it's a gradual evolution, and that evolution and performance increase has plateaued within the automotive industry. And when that happens, minute details are the things that change. It becomes about aesthetics, side details, what kind of hi-fi, does it have Bluetooth, all these kind of things are what differentiates the car. If you look at the last 20 years, there's not going to be a bad car in terms of if it's going to work as what a car needs to do, move you around the place. But it's the looks, it's the inside, it's the interior, it's the additional package elements that aren't actually about what makes a car a car. So then a business like Tesla comes in, they have lofty ambitions and they state them very, very publicly what they're trying to do. And if you look at their car sales, they're not selling that many Teslas because they can't produce them. They're trying to establish the incredibly complex supply chains that the existing incumbent automotive companies have cultivated over 70 years plus. And that's an incredibly difficult thing to do when they're all trying to outcompete you. But it changes the narrative that the industry currently has. No longer are electrics a niche experiment that we're just going to try, then can and crush. That's something that we have to have. Governments then change their long-term ambitions for electric vehicle sales and what petrol and diesel cars have to be able to do for the next 20 years because there's now a company that can do what we want to do in the future. So then people like GMC, Ford, Toyota, Honda, et al. Have to look at their existing businesses and pivot and answer the question that Tesla has posed the industry of what you're going to do about electric vehicles. Tesla in the future may well be the biggest car company on the planet, but right now what it's doing is forcing the biggest car companies on the planet to stop diesel engine production and stop developing new petrol engines in 10 years' time and have solely electric vehicles. That would have happened, but I think there's a very strong argument to say it wouldn't have happened as quickly if there wasn't Tesla. So companies like SICK come in and they have a very strong character, very strong stance online, a very, lowering the veil, revealing development and what goes on behind the scenes. And what happens? Santa Cruz changes its marketing flavor. Specialized puts out a press release that has swears in it and suggests this is the end of bullshit. Did SICK cause that? Probably not directly, but brands like SICK and Kingdom and Pole and all the other small disruptive companies trying different and interesting things force the larger companies to address what they're posing and pivots the industry. The rapid increasement of performance in cars and then the kind of slow plateauing is kind of been held in a much shorter period of time with mountain bikes. How much have they actually improved in the last 10 years? Has there been that? What was the difference in improvement from 95 to 2005? Was there the same level of improvement in ability from 2005 to 2015? I don't think you'll find anyone that say there was. What's going to happen in the next 10 years now that the incumbents have to address pedal assist and disruptive brands moving into their space? Only time will tell. But it's interesting to watch from the outside. Thanks for watching, and tell us what your thoughts are in the comments. Let's have another debate about this one. Cheers.